Okay, so we're going to kick off our introduction of Rena Berlin. Rena Berlin began her career as a teacher at the Northern Virginia Hebrew congregation. After 13 years of teaching, she decided to see if she would like being with children 5 days a week and became an instructional assistant and then returned to school at 36 years old as a student in the George Mason University's teacher education program. It was at George Mason that Rena realized how little college students knew about the Holocaust. Her English professor assigned the book Night by Elie Wiesel, introducing the book by asking the class what they knew about the Holocaust. Not one of the students knew what the word Holocaust referred to, not one. As a middle school teacher, Rena realized that she was the only 7th grade US history teacher to include the Holocaust in the study of World War II. Rena later started volunteering as a docent at the Virginia Holocaust Museum. In 2006, while attending a Yom HaShoah, which is the Day of Remembrance program at Richmond's Holocaust Cemetery, the director of the Virginia Holocaust Museum and Holocaust survivor, Mr. J. Ibsen, who our group of knitters may remember for his mother's sweater with the gold coins. We've talked about the J. Ibsen sweater. Mentioned the museum was about to hire its first director of education. Rena said, "Pick me," and he did. In 2009, J. Ibsen and Rena wrote and facilitated the enactment of the only Virginia legislation passed by the Virginia General Assembly to date. Though this bill needs to be made much stronger, it was the first step to Holocaust education in Virginia. Rena now teaches Holocaust and modern genocide at the University of Richmond's Osher Institute via Zoom. You can tell by looking at her, Rena, always an art person, began to weave when her kids were young and on a rigid Heddle loom to alleviate the stress of being a student and mother of 3. We have some weavers, I can tell.
One of my children is listening to this, so.
Beautiful. Her weaving continues to give her great joy, especially when her scarves are welcomed by an upscale Richmond store. Welcome, Rena.
Thank you. Now I'm embarrassed.
No, love it. And it's all love in this group. So can you talk a little bit? We started with you teaching at the Northern Virginia Hebrew congregation, where, as you know, my brother-in-law who's on the call and my husband got their religious education. And before my wedding, we had our ufruf in that congregation. So it's very close to our family. And I wonder before that, if you could talk a little bit about what drew you to that, sort of in your upbringing, what led you to working in your congregation?
Well, I never wanted to be a teacher, ever. In my family, everyone is a teacher, and I mean everybody. And I said it was not going to be me. However, my son, Ethan, who was, I believe, in kindergarten, probably with Robbie Singer, was in a class where the teacher quit. That's how good they were, how well behaved they were. She walked out, and the director of education, may she rest in peace, Ruth Hershkowitz, saw me in the hall and said, "You should teach." And I said, "I shouldn't." And she said, "Yes, you're going to." And nobody said no to Ruth Hershkowitz, nobody. So I went in and I taught, and I really had a good time. It was a lot of fun. That was kindergarten. And then I made my way up through the curriculum, and I taught first year Hebrew, and which is a joke because all I can really manage is first year Hebrew. And then I taught 8th grade, which was wonderful because it was issues, modern issues. And the kids, I loved the kids, absolutely loved them. Robbie, close your ears, you shouldn't be hearing this. But I loved them. They were interesting, and unlike anything else I taught, I could talk about Jewish things. So I taught for 13 years at Northern Virginia Hebrew congregation. I finally stopped and went back and went for a job as an instructional assistant. And as I said, to see if I could stand being in a room with kids for that many hours. You know, kids are great. I had 3 of my own, I love them. But to be in a classroom, if you've been a classroom teacher or you are a classroom teacher, you know that it's not easy, especially now. And I loved it. I found that that was where I wanted to be. I was very lucky. I was mentored by a wonderful principal, and she told me, quit, go back to school. I'll hire you if I can. And so I did. I was very lucky.
Can you talk a little bit about your family of origin and what was the flavor of Judaism and sort of what was your upbringing?
Yes. And I'm from Brooklyn. I'm from New York. So I speak quickly. So if you think I'm speaking too quickly, you'll need to tell me. I was born in Brooklyn. My father and mother, I guess, were married about a year when they had me. The neighborhood was a wonderful one. It was row houses and some apartments. And I lived in a 2-family apartment above a dress manufacturer. My grandparents lived within walking distance, and for a while we lived together in that same apartment with my grandparents. And so I understood Yiddish. I couldn't speak it, but they thought they were fooling me when they spoke, and I knew what they were saying. And finally, I stupidly gave myself away. You could walk to elementary school. The neighborhood was all Jewish and Black. It was Jewish and Black. So on my side of the street, it was Jewish from my side to the elementary school. Behind me, it was Black. And so the kids just played together, and I thought all the Black kids were Jewish because what do I know? I didn't know anything. We were good friends. It was a nice neighborhood. We dated, we had fun together. It was great. There were some Holocaust survivors in my situation, in my neighborhood. One was a grocer, and my grandfather used to go in there with me, and I noticed this number on his arm, and I asked my grandfather what it was. He said, "Oh, it's nothing. Not to worry, it's nothing." I never got an answer from him, really. I went to Hebrew school, never heard anything about the Holocaust. I went to religious school, separately, and I went 4 days a week and Sunday. I never heard anything about the Holocaust. There was no education. There was no explanation of that number, nothing. And I just accepted. What did I know? But one day when my oldest son must have been in maybe 7th grade in a friend of ours class, Ellen Rugel, he was doing a family project. And part of the project was to find and talk to the oldest member of his family and do an interview. So we at that point were living in Washington, or outside of Washington, in Reston. And we went to New York for the family Hanukkah party, and my grandfather, who must have been about 86 then, he interviewed him. Josh interviewed him, and my grandfather said, "Oh, you don't want to hear this, no one cares." And then Josh said, "It's for school." That was it. If it's for school, you're going to listen. He's going to talk. And as he's talking to us, and he's talking to his whole family, he says something about a video. And there was dead silence. Everybody said, "Papa, what video?" Well, it seems that he and my grandmother, who were quite wealthy until the Depression, not an uncommon story, went back home. They went to Poland, Russia. My grandmother lived in a place called Grodno. Now it shows up as Poland, but then it was Russia, and she spoke fluent Russian and was very proud of herself. So they went back to visit their relatives, and they went back with suitcases full of clothes, intending to give the clothes to the relatives. And the video, which my cousin Joanne put together, and it really extends all the way through my growing up years, because it's family stuff. But the beginning of the video shows my great grandfather, who had come to the United States. His son had brought him and his stepmother to the United States after he came over at the age of about 16. And so the video shows my great grandfather and his wife and all of my relatives wishing my grandparents a bon voyage. And then there's a scene of New York Harbor, which is just incredible, because you would never guess it was New York Harbor, except for the Empire State Building, I think that, or the Chrysler Building, I'm not sure which it is. And then it shows their visit to their families. They didn't know how to use a movie camera. So some of the video is, from the neck down. Some of the video is goofy, and it's all silent because there was no sound then. But this video was so amazing to me because I think Tanya's going to show some of it, but there's a scene with women dancing, my grandmother and her sisters. And in it, one of the sisters looks just like my mother. I mean, it's the same dimples and the same face. And her dimples are found on my daughter, Rebecca, and on my granddaughter, Rose. So to see this come down is pretty wonderful. It's just really a family movie. But shall I talk about it now, Tanya? Would you prefer now?
Let's wait. Can you just remind me of the year, that approximate year?
Well, they think he thought it was either 1929 or 1928. Now that's before anything was going on with Hitler. That is my grandfather in the middle, my grandmother in the flowered dress. These are relatives. That's a boxcar. Now, I have no idea what it's doing there. It had nothing to do with the Holocaust other than that's the woman that looks just like my mother. The Klempner women, her maiden name was Klempner. The Klempner women loved to dance. And so that's what they did. And that's my grandmother with her hand on her hip. And my grandfather, that's my grandfather who loved animals, loved them. Let's see, that is the graveyard that my grandmother's mother, my great-grandmother, was buried in. That's my great-grandfather. That's my grandmother, who had not seen her mother's grave until that time, because she was in America. And anyway, her father is saying prayers, and those are her sisters around her. Yeah, there's music in the background. My cousin felt that was important. And so this is her seeing her mother's grave for the first time. And you can see it's a very rural area. This was not a city. This was a shtetl, a town. And he's saying prayers for them. And my grandmother said she couldn't get off the grave. She just couldn't get up. She just was so overcome. And that's my great-grandfather. In this video, there's a better shot of him. You could actually see his face, but he had a long beard. He was very Russian looking. Yeah, it's translating not very well. And that's my grandmother. She was, and I think you could shut it off right here. This is my grandfather's family. And they were, so they were in a different place, and I'll talk about his family in a minute. Okay, Tanya, thank you. So my grandmother's family, the two sisters and the father and all the cousins, were taken out to the back of their shtetl, their town, and they were told to dig graves, and they were shot. We know this because of research that the Holocaust Museum in Washington did, and we did some research about what they had found. My grandfather's family was taken to Auschwitz, about 75 people, not his father, not his mother. His mother had died by then, but not his stepmother. And his brothers also were in America by then, but all the cousins were taken. When we did research on that side of the family, what we found was one living relative in California who had Alzheimer's, so that we couldn't make any contacts with her. At that point, I started reading everything I could find, everything. You also have to remember that as far as Holocaust information is concerned, until the movie, The Holocaust, until the TV show, The Holocaust, it was very hard to find anything on the Holocaust. People didn't want to talk about it. They had had enough of the war. So after the war, they weren't interested in hearing about it or talking about it. They also blamed the Jews themselves. At Northern Virginia Hebrew Congregation, I was in a group once with a couple, and she said to my husband and I, well, it was their fault. Why didn't they just leave? First of all, I didn't hit her. That, gotta tell you, my husband kept saying, calm, be calm. And I tried to explain that I asked her, what does it take to leave? She said, well, you just have to want to leave. I said, no, you have to want to leave and you have to have some money to go with it. And the Germans were not letting Jews out with money. So even if you had the money, you couldn't get out with it unless you were very lucky. And there were some people that were very lucky, like the woman that you're involved with, Judy. They had a little money, I think, when they left. So there wasn't that much information. Elie Wiesel, who wrote the book, many books, but he wrote the famous book, Night, about the Holocaust. And if you haven't read it, you should read it. It's an amazing book. I'm going to teach an Osher class in September on Elie Wiesel's book, Night, and it will be limited numbers. So his book was first published 10 years, first looked at by a publisher 10 years after he had written it. He couldn't get a publisher. And when he said he wanted to publish this book, he said it was a novel. It was not a novel. It's a memoir. Eventually he got it published, and his information took off. But I just read everything I could possibly get, and I continued to read everything. As a matter of fact, when I was looking at books today, I realized there are a lot of books out there that I haven't read yet, and most of them are in young adult. And that concerns me, and I will read them. It concerns me because there's a book called The Boy in Striped Pajamas, which should be banned from ever being used in a classroom because it's a fable. It's not real. It couldn't have happened. So you're teaching Holocaust through lies. And so it's not something that should be read, in my opinion, in my strong opinion. And Karen can tell you, I always have strong opinions. So.
Thank you. That film, it's like, sort of knocks you out. It's quite beautiful, and it's such a precious piece of your family's history, but so amazing for us to see, and just like try to remember a world without all the technology and photos and all the stuff that we're so used to today, and how special that moment was for your grandmother to see her mother's grave, and then of course that all those people were lost in such a horrible way. So thank you for sharing your family's film with us. And it's so striking too, because I guess, even to think about that people went back to Europe to visit, it's like that's quite extraordinary. Like, it's just sort of in every history story every family story, it's like, we left. Like, there's not a go back.
When my cousin Marcia, as a college kid, said that she was going to Europe, my grandfather said, why? Mm-hmm. Why are you going? We left. Don't go back. And of course she did. And she should have. So
in your own schooling, I know you said there was just to be sure, like, it's at some point, did your own family, before you had kids and the class project came up, was there formal Holocaust education that you received, or even informal in your family and discussions, or was it just sort of, you caught it through the culture?
I didn't catch it at all. I knew nothing about it. My parents didn't discuss it. We had no survivors in our family, so we weren't told about any of the family. No, we didn't talk about it. It wasn't that they avoided it, I don't think. Well, maybe they were, I don't know. They just didn't talk about it. Mm-hmm. And I didn't ask questions, because in order to ask questions, you have to know what you don't know. And I didn't know what I didn't know. Once I started to read, they weren't very well informed on the Holocaust. They really, they could tell me what it was, and they could tell me how it impacted my family, but they didn't, not even that really, because we didn't know what happened to the extended family until the U.S. Holocaust Museum in Washington opened. And 2 years after that, my cousin Marcia and I went to do research, and that's when we found out. So really, we didn't know. Nobody knew.
Wow. So let's fast forward a little bit to that moment when you're sitting in a classroom and, you know, you have familiarity when the book Night is introduced. You know what, you have some background at this point that you've gathered on your own. What did that feel like when people it just didn't register? There was just no reaction.
Well, first I didn't. Oh, you mean in the class? I was, remember, a 36-year-old student in a class with 19-year-olds. So half of what I knew, they didn't know because they hadn't had the life experiences. But I found them very interesting group. And we had read something before, and they, you know, it was interesting discussion. And the professor, this just amazing professor, she just couldn't believe it. She just blasted them. And I sat there thinking, this is really strange. This is, I couldn't believe it. And then I kind of dug around a little bit. And remember, this is before the internet, so it was really hard to dig around. I asked questions. I talked to some of the people in the class, and I said, did you ever study this in school? And no one ever did. Most of the time, it was skipped over because it was too difficult to teach. And it is difficult to teach. And also, if you don't know anything, you shouldn't be teaching it. And people just said, oh, I don't really know a lot, and I don't know where to get information. And so they didn't teach it. They taught World War II and left out the Holocaust. And I was blown away. I just can't even tell you how I was horrified. I got a very good mark in the class.
The teacher's pet becomes the teacher, right?
Yeah, she offered me a fellowship, but I said, no, I don't want to be an English teacher. Thank you. But yeah.
We have an English professor in the Zoom right now.
Well, I'm happy you're an English professor, and I'm happy that I'm not. I think it's like being a math professor. Math professors have so much work. And I taught English for 1 year, very unhappily. And when I would get to the papers of the kids, you know, I see Kelly is shaking her hand. I couldn't handle it. I was like, I don't want to read this. So I know it's not nice.
Kelly would never say that.
Well, I can see she would never. Just that, you know, it's for some people and they love it, and I didn't love it. So
yeah. So how have you? I know you're a big student, and what have you done to become? I mean, you've read tons of books, and you amazing that you know it's hard to metabolize these books. It's hard to read this many books and feel grounded, and so I'm wondering, you know, aside from your own research and reading, how you've built your knowledge base on the Holocaust.
Well, first of all, I have to tell you what my husband said. We were lying in bed one night, and I am reading a book about the Holocaust. And he looked at me and he said, how can you read this before you go to bed? Well, he started to be a docent at the Virginia Holocaust Museum, and a year later, he's reading the same thing that I'm reading in bed. I have the need to know. I have to know. When I have a subject that I'm interested in, I don't want to know the topic, the topical things. I need to know why. I need to know how. And I mostly need motivation. I need to know what the motive was for somebody doing what they're doing. And of course, when it comes to the Holocaust, that's very hard to find. It's very hard to actually hear or read someone's motive. Because how can you express, well, I went out and killed, 14 children and 3 women and a bunch of men today. What was your motive? I don't know. It just felt like I should do it. Someone told me. I was following rules. And I started reading books that could answer my questions. Also, I was really lucky. When I was teaching in elementary school in 6th grade, I was only a first, second, third year teacher, and all these opportunities kept coming up. And I kept applying for them, and they kept saying, no, you have to teach for 3 years. So when I was done with my third year of teaching, I applied. One of the opportunities that came down was that when the Holocaust Museum in DC opened, Fairfax County wanted teachers to write curriculum there in the museum. And I applied and I got it. I don't know how many people really wanted this. A lot of people would not have wanted it, but I got it. And we spent 2 weeks in USHM, that's what they call the Holocaust Museum in Washington, from 9 o'clock in the morning before the crowds came. And that was the best time because we had curators come in and talk to us. We were taken on tours by Holocaust survivors, which was very interesting and unusual. We had meetings with Holocaust survivors who just sat and told us their stories. And we wrote some very bad curriculum. It was really not particularly good. Though it was published, it was really not good. But we learned, the group of us, I think there were 4 of us, learned so much. And they gave us materials to teach with. They gave us posters and they gave us booklets and they gave us CDs, yes, no, tapes maybe, I don't remember, CDs or tapes for our classrooms. And they gave us people we could talk to ask a question. And the Holocaust survivors we met gave us their information and said, call us, we'll come into class. And I learned something right on that when you hear a Holocaust survivor speak, or a survivor of anything really, we just had a Rwandan survivor come and speak with our class last week. When you hear them, you have to write down everything you hear, everything, because the next time you hear them, you'll hear more. So you have to have the knowledge of what they went through, whether you've watched a recording or if you're lucky to hear them speak over and over again. And that's how you fill in the puzzle of their lives. You also have to remember that when a survivor or any eyewitness tells you what he or she saw, that may or may not be real. Because I'll use Jay Ibsen as an example, and I'm so grateful for him because he hired me for a job I was not really qualified for. But I had been in the museum a lot and he knew me, so that he felt safe. He tells his story, but he was 8 and 9 years old during his story. So some of what he tells are the memories he heard from his parents. And that's fine. You never tell a Holocaust survivor, no, that can't be true. I mean, that's ridiculous. It is true. It is true because they say it's true. So one of the things you learn is that when you listen to survivors, you write, you script. And a lot of us teachers really know how to script because we've been taught it. And so you script and you keep the notes. And then before you meet them or see them again, you reread them. And you start thinking about, what do I wish I could ask? And I always told teachers that I taught about Holocaust when I was at the museum, you're going to have an opportunity to talk to Holocaust survivors. You have to ask what you want to know. They're used to difficult questions, but if you don't ask them, you're never going to hear them again, probably. And that's true, because most of them aren't living anymore.
There's so much in what you're saying, and there's a couple of things I want to drill down on, but the first is just how fortunate to have had access to so many survivors. And, it goes without saying that, people say within 10 to 12 years, we won't have access to survivors, they will be gone. And how sad that is. Like, that you can remember the grocer and the number on his arm. I can remember my teacher in Hebrew school when I was a kid who had a number on her arm. And so it's like these little moments that add up, that build a sensitivity, I think, to where we are, build empathy. And I think there's no substitute. For hearing it from a person. And I guess that leads me to my next question for you, which is, you've talked about saying you weren't the right person for the job in that moment, and that the curriculum you wrote when you went to the U.S. Holocaust Memorial Museum was no good. And so looking back, like, what do you wish you could tell your younger self? Like, don't do that, do this. Like, what makes a good Holocaust curriculum? How does one teach it?
That's interesting because when I came to the museum in Virginia, there was a teacher education program going on, and it was okay, wasn't, but it was, let's see how hard we can cry, because the people that were teaching it weren't Holocaust educators, and they did the best they could with what they had, and they were wonderful women. But the goal was to win the sympathy of the people who were listening and watching. Well, my goal was to teach the information, because if you don't know the information, I'm going to get a book, sorry. If you don't know the information, how will you know when it happens again? If it happens again? If you don't know how it got set in place, how do you know if something's sniffing around that's going to happen again? If you've never read the book The Plague by Camus, I read it. It took me a year to read it. I hated every single minute of it. But a friend of mine at the museum said, you really have to read this, blah, 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 blah. So I read it. I got to the last page and I thought I was so blown away, because what he says is that waiting in, you'll hear my Brooklyn accent, waiting in the drawers and bureaus are the rats ready to come out and start it all over again. And so Holocaust curriculum can't be, oh, boo-hoo. It's sad. It's heartbreakingly sad. It's tragically sad. But it can't be, you can't use, let's try it out. Let's have a simulation. You can't simulate it. And this is done all over the country and all over the world. Let's try and pretend, the green-eyed, blue-eyed experiment. It's done, you can't do this, because first of all, it destroys kids. And second of all, it teaches nothing. So when you teach the information, teach the background, teach about who was lost and what it means when people are eradicated. And what you've done is you've lost potential, because every person that was in that situation was just an ordinary person, just simple, ordinary people. One of the women I play Mahjong with is a Holocaust survivor. She's 92 and she would kill to win Mahjong. She's as sharp as could possibly be. She's wonderful, but she's quirky, because they're quirky. So if you're going to construct Holocaust curriculum, you have to first think of, what do you want them to come away with? It's this old teaching pattern. What do you want them to know at the end? So at the end, you want them to know, in my opinion, what you want them to know is how it got there. How did it get there? And this is a book, little tiny book. It's called, one second. It's called On Tyranny. On Tyranny, 20 Lessons from the 20th Century. It's written by Timothy Snyder, who is a Holocaust historian. You can see the markings, okay? Probably shouldn't be talking about this maybe, because it's kind of political. It was written in the time of Trump, and it was written in response to it. But in here, he talks about the Holocaust and how it got where it got, and lessons that we should learn. So using something like this to teach, there are lots and lots of books on the Holocaust out there, tons, thousands, I'd say. Finding books that tell the story, that tell it correctly, that tell it in an age-appropriate way, and books you can trust. So Holocaust curriculum has to be written thinking about what you want to happen with it at the end. What do you want the kids or adults to come away with? When I taught my last Holocaust class, which was in September, I think, to Osher, I had two women, and there were 82 people taking the class on Zoom. There were two women that on the last class were crying. They said they never knew the Jews were involved in the Holocaust. Okay, these are not young women. These are women my age. And so, you can't really say that I wanted to say, duh, but obviously it isn't it's lack of education, it's lack of knowledge, it's lack of experience, and being afraid to learn something that is extremely difficult to learn. It's scary.
It sure is.
So yeah.
I mean, so thinking about On Tyranny and sort of the connection to the present, which I think we can all, that's not a leap for any of us on this Zoom to make. Can you just talk a little bit about, your journey in getting Holocaust education mandated in Virginia, which is one of only 17 US states that has mandated Holocaust education, and why now more than ever? Why is it so important?
It was a journey. I was working for a Holocaust survivor, Jay Ibsen. He hired me, and I didn't know this at the time. He hired me to get a Holocaust education bill passed in the General Assembly. I didn't know anything about this. I was a teacher. What do I know? My husband helped us craft it. And Jay, every time I said something about wanting to do a program or something, just get the bill, do the bill. And I was like, oh my God. So one lovely day, he started to yell at me. He was a yeller. He started to yell at me, and I turned around. He's a short little guy. I yelled at him and I said, if I get that bill passed for you, will you leave me alone? And he said, yes. I said, and he kept his word. So I started interviewing people that had already been involved in passage of a Holocaust bill. I got the list of where these bills had been passed, and I called every single one of them, and they were wonderful. They shared what to do, we shared what not to do, and I made a list, and we went forth, and we held a reception for the Virginia Senate and House of Delegates, and a lot of those people came, and we showed them around the museum, and we gave them a passport with somebody's face on it, and the survivors came, and the Jewish community came. It was like a real, good party. But the goal was to get this passed. And you know how you took civics? Remember, Robbie, you took it in 8th grade, probably. So did my daughter, Rebecca. You know how they say, this is how a bill is passed? That's not how it works. It doesn't work that way. That's what they want you to know. That's what they want you to think. But really, the way it works is through somebody sponsoring it that has political clout. Okay, that's the first thing. And we did a wonderful man named Frank Hall, who had a great amount of political clout. He died a number of years ago. And then we wrote a brief. We wrote a 1-page executive statement. I always say we, because Shay was such a dynamic part of this. And we got a hearing because of Frank Hall. So on the day of the hearing, it really was a hearing, we got to, I think it was the House first, and we're sitting in the seats waiting for Frank to get there and present our case. And his aide comes up to me and says, Frank's stuck in a budget meeting. He's not going to be here. Honestly, the only thing I can tell you is all I thought was, oh shit. Really, like, oh my God, you've got to be kidding. Jay looked at me and I looked at him. I said, you're the Holocaust survivor. You're going to have to introduce it, because he wears a cowboy hat. He's known all over Richmond. Everybody knows him. And he looked at me and said, all right, So he got up and he pitched it for about, 5 minutes. And then I got up and I told them what I thought. And I told them why it was necessary. I also told them how much Holocaust education was then and now part of curriculum in Virginia, as part of the SOLs, the standards of learning. Teachers are told by the Department of Education, the Virginia Department of Education, how long to teach each piece of the social studies curriculum. They are and were told they had to teach all of World War II in 2 weeks. The Japanese side, the German side, the home front, everything had to be taught in 2 weeks. That translated into one day of Holocaust education. I don't even know what you'd say. A lot of the teachers came to the Virginia Holocaust Museum because we were local and we were easy to get to. And we were mobbed, really. You couldn't get a tour appointment. But if you tell legislators that the curriculum is such, they think you're nuts. But I had the proof and I passed it around. I just had copied what they had on the Department of Education's website. And obviously it can't happen. But here's the rub. We were really opposed by the Department of Education and the lobbyists that were in charge, that represented the school systems, because you have this much knowledge in one school year. And now I am telling you, you need to expand to this much knowledge. And where are you going to fit it? Where are you going to put it? And so that was really a real fight to get the Department of Education to agree to approve this bill. We watered it down until it was just, it's just really almost nothing, but it is something. We fought hard for this. We went to the Senate and it was passed unanimously. Then we went to the Senate and they have these meetings. They don't tell you about these meetings in civics class. They have these meetings where all these stakeholders come in. Jay and I were there, and these delegates sit there reading the newspaper or writing notes to each other while you're presenting your information. And honestly, just want to say, where are your manners? Where are your Southern manners? They're not existent. But there was one man, he's not very well thought of here or pretty much anywhere, Joe Morrissey. Look him up if you don't know him, Joe Morrissey. He is really a character and not such a wonderful guy to some people. He stood up to them and he said, this has to be passed. And not only that, but you have to include modern genocide, which every other entity that advised me on the bill said, never do that. So fine, he said it could happen. And so eventually, within one session of the General Assembly, this did pass. And this bill says that teachers of, I think it's specific subjects, must use a teacher's guide to teach the Holocaust. The goal of the museum at that time was to produce such a teacher's guide. And there was one. I don't know if it's still around. But that is really nothing. It's nothing. However, teachers, when they read a mandate for something, really understand that they're going to do it. So they went and came to our museum for instruction and for workshops, and from facing history, facing ourselves, came and did workshops for us. If you haven't seen that website, you should. We had lots and lots of trainings and information for ages 6 to 12 and also graduate. But I was very much in favor of not letting kids who were in 5th grade and below come to the museum. If a teacher had been trained in our teacher education institute, then that was okay in 5th grade, but that's it. Because some things are just too much. You know, the pictures are just too much. And so that's how it stands now. The thing is that if you get English teachers to come to these trainings, to come to these classes, and by the way, there's one this summer, get on the Virginia Holocaust Museum's website, you'll see it. But if you get an English teacher, especially an English teacher that is teaching The Diary of a Young Girl, Anne Frank's story, you can catch them, because teachers who teach Diary of a Young Girl are not teaching the Holocaust. They're teaching a story about a young woman who is in, becoming a teenager, and who is in love for the first time, but it's not set, they don't set it very much in the Holocaust. And if teachers don't know anything about the Holocaust, then they can't teach it properly. So getting the English teachers in here, into the museum, getting the math teachers in, because math teachers look at things totally different. They look at it this way, linear. getting them to understand how they can play with the numbers, play with the economics of the Holocaust. Getting the science teachers in, because this is science. I mean, the killing of Jews and how they did it and the experimentation and all the stuff. This is science. And so that's what happened. We got a lot of those teachers in, and it has improved, in my opinion. When do they teach it? They teach it the last 2 weeks of school. They teach it the last 2 weeks of school because the SOLs are done. And then they can go back to teaching what they want to teach. And teachers are miraculous. They're just miraculous. So
thank you for that.
Answer. You're
Thank
welcome.
you for that. How is that? I mean, is there any enforcement, or is it like is someone checking the box to make sure that it is actually being done? Because we had in my area a Holocaust memorial was defaced with pamphlets during the Trump era in the last year or two, and there were folks from Governor Cuomo's office who came, and so I of course went right up to them. And at that time, my local public school, there were swastikas in the bathroom on multiple occasions, and it's a very Jewish area. And I was like, what is happening here? Like, how is our Holocaust memorial being defaced? How is this happening? And they were like, well, we have it. We're one of the states that have it. And I was like, well, so who's holding schools accountable? How do we know that schools are actually teaching the Holocaust? So I know you can't answer for every state, but I wonder in Virginia, what is the way of making sure that it actually happens?
Well, the kids take SOLs at the end, and it's been my experience. There are 50 questions. I think that's still right. Usually one question is having to do with the Holocaust or pre-Holocaust and who were the actors in this. And so that's part of it. Really nobody. You have to trust the teachers. Why would a teacher teaches what a school system says they have to teach, but if they know something, I'll use my daughter Rebecca as an example. She taught in the Teacher Education Institute. She's an art teacher, and she taught art about art in the Holocaust, degenerative art, and a whole bunch of other stuff. How do we know what she teaches? She teaches what she needs to teach because she's told she needs to teach it, and then how she teaches it is the art of teaching. So if she has to teach about a certain kind of painters, which painters does she choose? She's now teaching in a school that's predominantly African-American. So how does she select which painters those children will see? She selects using her program of studies, using what she's supposed to teach, and also the people she's teaching to. So teachers are going to teach what they're supposed to teach, but how well they do it is up to how much knowledge they themselves have. And I would rather somebody not teach it than teach it badly, because there are Holocaust deniers out there. There are many of them. If they find a museum or an educational institution that's teaching wrong information, they say, see, if that's wrong, why isn't everything wrong? And so it really needs to be taught correctly.
Could you give advice to, we're from all different states on this call, and if how would one go about, I mean, you are a force of nature, as we can tell in this brief time with you. And Jay Ibsen for sure is a force of nature, and and a survivor with the great fire in sort of advocating, right? And so without the team of Rena and Jay, how does it?
There are lots of people that were involved in this and that are still trying to get this bill passed, another bill passed. So there's a whole team out there still working. One of the things, I'm sorry, go ahead. I should let you talk. You can tell I jump in.
Oh, no, I mean, I'm just wondering, if I'm not in one of those, I'm in one of the 17 states, and I'm so disappointed in what's happening. And you and I have been emailing about the ethnic studies curriculum being developed in California, and there's a whole lot more to be said about what's happening and whose stories will be shared in in history classes and, as you say, English, math, science, everything else. But I'm just wondering how, if people feel strongly about advocating for this in their communities or their states, like how does one, do you have advice,
Yeah, sure.
for how to go about that?
When I lived in Northern Virginia, I could have cared less about the Virginia Department of Education. I mean, they were there, they told me what I'm supposed to be doing, and I dismissed them immediately. I also did not pay much attention to the representatives in the House of Delegates and the Virginia Senate. I didn't know them. Oh, I knew one of them. I didn't care. We were near Washington. That was what counted. Well, it turns out that these delegates and these senators, Virginia senators, are able to make change in localities more than anybody else. They really are your people to go to. So make an appointment with them, but come very well prepared. Come with a packet of information, not a huge one, just like an executive summary of what you want. Tell them what is there and have proof of it, and then tell them what you want and why you want it, and what you want them to do. And start there. Then go to the Virginia, in my case, Virginia Department of Education. They were completely unhelpful with us, but it's a whole, it's like a long time ago. I even had a rock that our Rabbi Gold, gave me from Terezin, a concentration camp. And she had given me, because I collect rocks, she gave me this rock, and I put it in a little envelope, and I handed it to this Department of Education, Secretary of Department of Education. And he loved, oh my God, that's so thoughtful. And I love, keep it on my desk, and didn't change a thing. So go to the delegates, and if you have the means, contribute to their campaign. That will help even more. Also get involved with the Federation, the Jewish Federation.
And can you talk about, because you've also got the museum piece, the importance of museums and the role a museum can play, because maybe in my kid's lifetime, I can't make the meaningful change I want to make, but how do you see museums fitting in?
I am a museum lover. I'm a New Yorker. I grew up with the museums. I took my kids to the museums in the district in DC all the time. One of the things I belong to is the VMFA, the Virginia Museum of Fine Arts. I believe in museums. Holocaust museums tell a story. The one in Virginia is particularly, the one in Richmond, I think is particularly good. The first time I went there, I thought, I'm going to hate this. It's going to be dorky, and it's nothing like USHM, which is a big deal, and I'm going to hate this. I loved it because it told the story on a quieter level, on a more understandable level. I believe that's where kids can get this education. Most small museums, especially, well, Illinois is not a small museum, and they have docents. A lot of museums have docents. You want those people to take you around. Sometimes you have to get up to 10 people to do that, but it's worth gathering a group. You want them to take you around because they know a lot. And if they don't know it, they'll find out the answer. When my shot is fully in place, I'll go back to being a docent at the Holocaust Museum in Virginia, because I think it's the most important thing I do. And when I take those kids, and that when the kids come in, the kids that understand what I'm saying in their hearts are kids who are Black. The Black kids look at me and shake their heads because they know what it's like to be discriminated against. They know it. I don't have to explain it. And they come away really affected. And I come away when I hear the Black kids' comments, because I come away changed every time. And looking at their faces is phenomenal. So if you have an opportunity to volunteer in a museum, certainly a Holocaust museum, if you're in New York, there are several wonderful museums you could volunteer in. Washington needs volunteers at USHM. It's a great place. a great place to volunteer, and you really are teaching the future.
Absolutely. I want to open it up. There's a lot of activity in our chat.
Can you
So
read it aloud? So I have to
absolutely.
take my glasses on and off. otherwise.
First question, and then we'll throw to Wendy, who is a fellow, what is the word, Richmonder? How do we call you?
Are you, Wendy? Oh, I see you.
I'm actually from Hampton Roads. I'm in
Oh.
Norfolk,
Okay.
not a little down the road.
And nice place. I like it.
Oh, good. I'm glad.
So there are a number of comments. Wendy, maybe you could just to give the update on the SOLs, because it sounds like you've got some current information about that, and then ask your question about the book.
So Rena, first of all, it is absolutely a pleasure to connect with you. This is like buried treasure for me. I wish I had found you about 3 years ago.
Well, I'm still here.
You were like,
And Tanya can share my email.
you're like my Holocaust soul sister. So
I feel about Tanya.
And Tanya, like to connect. This is like amazing what's been happening. But anyway, I'm on the Holocaust Commission for the Federation down in our area.
Yeah.
You probably know some of those people who contacted you when you were like Betsy
Yes,
Karatkin and Elena Baum. Anyway.
Yeah. Oh, Elena Baum is awesome.
Yes, she is. She's still there. Anyway, I've been on the commission over 25 years. I started when I was 12. And,
right. Nice.
So a couple of years, and I've done a whole bunch. So anyway, a couple of years ago, right after Charlottesville, and I think right about the time the governor was elected, I started thinking about mandated Holocaust education, just like you had. And I started doing research, and all of the media on it kept saying there were only 9 states, and Virginia, for some reason, was not listed.
That's often said, yes.
So I started digging, and we had someone actually at our Community Relations Council, which is another way that people can get involved with legislation. I want to throw that out there too. And we found your mandate, your law, because I thought I was going to have to start from scratch.
No, it's almost scratch.
Well, but so the good news is we started, what I did was went through everything you did. I couldn't get through to the Department of Education. And I finally, I actually had a connection to Tim Kaine's wife, who used to be the Secretary of Education, and got in touch with her and started making some connections. And we also attend the Virginia Social Studies Conference.
I did for years, yeah.
Which is another good place if people wanna, you don't have to be a teacher to attend your state social studies conference. It's a good way to make some connections with teachers and sit in on things and learn about what it is on the front, what it's like to teach on the front lines. And we were also we were lucky enough to present our education project for a couple of years there. So we got to know a lot of people.
Wonderful.
And I actually managed to connect with the state social studies coordinator, who actually
Mazel tov.
Was delighted. I had not been able to, it was like a brick wall, like you found. As it turned out, we connected with her, and we said, we want to know what we can do to help you get this implemented. And she was actually really open to it, and we developed a relationship with her. And then what happened is I was working on how do we start getting it implemented. I looked for the guide that you had written, and nobody could find it. I called the museum. She thought it had been pulled because of copyright issues. It was like, I thought, oh, it's got to be, I just wanted to see it. So we couldn't find it. And then I was working on what our next move would be. And then sort of out of the blue, there was the Federation in the Community Relations Council, for those people who are not Jewish, Jewish federations, which are kind of like, I call them sort of like Jewish United Ways. They're big umbrellas of things. And most of them have an outreach committee that interfaces with the rest of the community for all different reasons. So the Northern Virginia Community Relations Council, someone on there reached out to a delegate to sponsor a Holocaust bill. And what it ended up being was an amendment to your bill to actually give it some teeth and implement it. And so what they ended up doing is 3 federations in Virginia, ours, Richmond and Northern Virginia got together and started circulating the bill and fixing it up. When it got to us, we sent it to the coordinator, and she fixed it up. She gave us a lot of great advice on what would actually work, because she would be the one implementing it.
Right.
And it passed. It passed year before last. So it passed in 2019.
Wonderful.
We went up and advocated it for it. There's a Jewish Advocacy Day in Virginia, which is
Yes.
very well.
I used to go to that, but I don't anymore. I should.
So anyway, I just want to let you know it passed. And not only that, they have several different committees that are reviewing the kind of curriculum that is going to be developed. And it's going to not just be SOL stuff. What they're moving away from is not as the whole story of the SOLs is too boring
Yes,
to go
right.
into here, another conversation, but they're going to more problem-based learning and critical thinking skills. And they're going to teach what they're going to develop is the Holocaust, and along with we had to put in other genocides and different things to get it passed, as you know. And they're going to move towards problem-based learning and meaningful instruction, where all the things, the way that you want it taught, I think is going to happen.
Well, Wendy, if you can think of anything I could do, please let me know. I'd be very happy to do.
I need to talk to you for 3 hours, so I'm going to get your information from Tanya. But thank you, Tanya. Thank Rena. Everything you said is just fantastic. My other question was, there's a book called 3 Minutes in Poland, which is about, I don't know if you've ever heard about it. The fellow who wrote it, he was going through things in his, I think his grandparents, after his parents had died or something. He found always a shoebox in the closet, and it had film in it. And
oh my gosh.
And it was film of his family had gone back just like yours. I mean, seeing yours gave me goosebumps. And it was this 3 minutes of the village. It was in 1938, 37. It was like right before everything got terrible.
Oh my God.
Russia. And he took these 3 minutes, and the whole book is his journey of how he sort of extrapolated the story of his family and what happened and who was in this film. And I mean, you're lucky to know who actually was in your film and what was going on. I mean, that is like unbelievable piece of film. You're so blessed to have that.
Thank you. I'm going to buy this book tonight.
I'll look up the author, but he came and spoke at an education conference we had. But I mean, I just wanted to share that with you because it was so similar. So
thank you so much, Wendy, and thank you for doing what you're doing. I'm thrilled to hear it. And if you can think of anything I can do, I would be happy to do it.
Oh, I will. And I was about to pop, and I know Tanya she was very patient with me. So thank you for letting me.
I know I have some other questions in the chat, and that is an exciting, it's like the torch has been passed, and then here you are. It's really
wonderful. It's so exciting.
It's really a moment. It's awesome. So speaking of books, there is a question in the chat about books for young readers. So I'm thinking like elementary and middle.
Okay, I have a bunch I can give you. I would do Number the Stars by Lois Lowry. It's she's a good writer. The story is, I hate to use this expression, but it's Holocaust light. So there's no murder and, I mean, it's well done, but yet it is Holocaust. It's a really good book. There's a book called Friedrich by Hans Peter Richter, R-I-C-H-T-E-R. I don't think it's easy to get, but it's there. I looked it up today. It's a book about two families who live in an apartment building, one Jewish, one non-Jewish. And what happens to them? They're friends, and the boys are together and friends, and the parents are together. But then it shows change over time. So first, the Jewish father has a job, and he's very sharing with the other family, and then he loses his job because he's Jewish, and the other family gets a job. And anyway, it does not have a happy ending. It has a vocabulary of, it has some Jewish words. I have a vocabulary list. If I can find it, you're welcome to email me. But it's factual, it's readable, it's not very big, and it's very good for middle school. I taught it in middle school. I'm sure I must have paperwork on that too somewhere. There's a book called Briar Rose by Jane Yolen, Y-O-L-E-N. Jane Yolen is a wonderful author and has some connections to the Holocaust. Briar Rose is like a fairy tale. This girl is with her grandmother, and her grandmother starts telling her this story, and it's a Holocaust story. It's well written, and it's a good story. Then there's The Book Thief. Now, I have tried to read The Book Thief 3 times, and I cannot get into it. Everyone I know loves The Book Thief. So though I can't tell you I liked it because I couldn't get into it, it is a well-known and very highly thought of book. And you should think about that.
Thank you, everybody, for joining us for this very special. I feel so much smarter now. I'm not sure that I am, but I feel like you've really enriched my thinking about all of these issues. And I'm so grateful that there are so many museums that we can access to make this work of educating easier and take the burden off the schools, which don't wholly seem to be fitting the bill. So thank you so much, Rena Berlin, for giving us your night and your time. And,
it was my pleasure, and thank you for asking me.
You will hear more from us.
Please, and you're welcome to share the email.
Thank you so much.
All right, thank you. I'm gonna figure out how to leave.
Thank you, everybody.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening.